And so it's a tremendous honor to be publishing both of these fine women. And so please join me in giving both of them, and especially Nina, a very, very loud round of applause.
Can you hear me? Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm going to read from the Love Book, which is about 4 single women who find a mysterious book about love and their journey along the way. This section that I'm going to read is about Kathy. She's a special ed teacher who lives in New Jersey and hasn't had a date. Oh, hi, Kathy. She hasn't had a date since her fiance left her at the altar 5 years ago. All right, this chapter is called Playing with Fire. Engine Company 6 of the Bayonne Fire Department, breaking down her door at 3 a.m. was not how Kathy had envisioned her soulmate arriving. If she had, she'd have changed out of her flannel, nightshirt, and pink Uggs and into something a little more je ne sais quoi. But with her house burning down, she had no time to ponder the specifics. The firefighters, their faces streaked with black, sledgehammered their way inside. Glass splintered across the carpet. Kathy ran from room to room, gathering what valuable she could and trying to wrangle her cat. But every time she got within striking distance, the cat would dart away, and whatever possessions she'd collected slipped from her grasp. The firemen told her to leave the premises, but Kathy paid them no heed. She'd go to the ends of Hades to save Mrs. Beasley. The last thing Kathy had done before going to bed last night were the bonus exercises for day 7 of the Love Book, Cutting Toxic Ties. She'd followed the directions to the letter, compiled a comprehensive list of all the cheese-sucking people and situations in her life, and done the meditation on letting go. But rather than burn the list, as instructed, she'd fleshed it. Never one to take unnecessary risks, Kathy was especially careful with fire ever since putting a flaming potholder into the utility drawer last Thanksgiving. A septic issue she might have expected, but not a fire. She'd been kneeling in front of her soulmate altar, a low bench, positioned in the feng shui relationship sector of her house, doing her affirmations. I was born to be loved. I deserve to be cherished. My soulmate adores me. She'd spent hours agonizing over her toxic ties list. Whenever she turned out the light, another cheese sucker would spring to mind. By the time she finished, the list was 3 pages long. The only thing she'd forgotten to do was blow out the candles. Mrs. Beasley shot out from under the dining room table as the bulbs in the chandelier exploded like fireworks. In closets and cabinets, dusty keepsakes, heirlooms, hand-me-downs, all the treasured relics Kathy had been charged with preserving after her mother died, were devoured by a firestone. The emulsion on her grandparents' wedding photo melted off the paper, the image changing from positive to negative until wisping into nothing. Suddenly she felt herself being scooped up into a firefighter's sturdy embrace. "You're coming with me," he said. Kathy shouted, "Mrs. Beasley," at the top of her lungs, but he ignored her, charging through the smoke and carrying her a safe distance from the house before dropping her on the grass. He returned a few moments later with Mrs. Beasley, howling but unharmed, in her cat carrier. A million droplets of water sprayed into the sky. Tiny bits of ash fluttered like parched petals. Even from where she was standing, the heat from the fire was like a blast from a hot oven. The whole pajama-clad neighborhood had assembled around her house. Lawrence Weiner was leaning against the pumper truck, talking to the fire chief, using words like deflagration and pyrolysis. He had a PX series helmet with track light, and he was wearing his volunteer fireman windbreaker over the standard uniform he'd worn all through high school. Parachute pants, a patterned sweater vest, and those stupid tasseled loafers. When Kathy looked carefully, she noticed one was black, the other brown. He was in the process of narrating his timely rescue, bragging about how he'd been the first responder on the scene. Of course he was. He lived next door. All he had to do was slip on his mismatched loafers. When he swaggered away, Kathy met eyes with one of the firefighters. "Gear queer," he muttered. Luckily, she'd managed, despite all the chaos and commotion, to grab her purse, car keys, and at the last minute, the love book. This was the third copy she'd bought since forgetting hers at Charles de Gaulle. The first she'd doused with coffee in the teacher's lounge. The second she'd accidentally returned to the library with a stack of Harlequins. And this, the third in a series of replacements, had mysteriously jumped into her bag at the bookstore. She'd gone back to pay for it, but the irony of a book on the law of attraction finding her was not lost on Kathy. Every self-help book on relationships Kathy had ever read recommended putting oneself in a target-rich environment. So like a Navy SEAL, Kathy self-deployed on carefully planned search and destroy missions in free fire zones, recklessly diving into sports bars and happy hours, comic book and Star Trek conventions, worked out at the YMCA during peak times near the basketball court, and shopped at Trader Joe's, the mecca of convenience food for suburban bachelors. But she hadn't met a single man, not one with any potential. Still, she tried to remain open. As her mother used to say, Mr. Right doesn't have to be Mr. Perfect. But Mr. Right was definitely not going to be wearing parachute pants and a fireproof, environmentally controlled, shock-resistant, overpriced plastic helmet, PX series or not. As plumes of smoke and copper flames poured out of her second-floor window, Kathy thought that if she couldn't find a man here, in this motherload of men, an entire squadron of sexy firefighters delivered by the universe right to her doorstep, a fundraiser calendar brought to life. Maybe she was beyond self-help. The sun came up and finally the fire was contained. The crowd dwindled to just a few stragglers. Lawrence hovered nearby like a patch of stubborn pigweed. She was hugging the love book when the fireman who'd so unceremoniously deposited her on the lawn walked towards her. His suit was covered in mud, and his hair was matted down with sweat. Kathy hadn't noticed how clear and blue his eyes were, the kind of eyes that could cut through fog. He was carrying the pretty pink glass thing Kathy had found in the attic when she first moved in, embalmed in cobwebs. She had dusted it off and hung it by its metal bracket in the kitchen. The next thing Kathy noticed were the firefighters' sturdy firefighter boots. They were the boots of a guy who could be counted on, a man's man. No tasseled loafers for him. There's a lot of smoke and water damage, the firefighter said. Consider yourself lucky. If the fire had spread to the kitchen, this grenade extinguisher would have exploded from the heat. People think they're kitsch, highly toxic kitsch. Tough luck if you're standing there when it blows up in your face. I like it, Kathy said. It's pretty. The fireman was staring at her. Funny how pretty things can come in lethal packages, he said. Kathy blushed. The fireman wiped his brow. This law of attraction stuff really seemed to be working. And it was only day 7. She hadn't expected anything, not even a nibble, until at least week 8. His name was Sean O'Darby, a black Irishman, dark hair and blue eyes, the Dylan McDermott of New Jersey. He was getting some guff for flirting on the job. Whenever you're ready, Romeo, the fire chief called. Sean put on his helmet. Our revels now are ended, he said. Did you just say our revels? Kathy asked. All the Shakespeare she'd studied in high school hadn't been for naught. What you're calling a revel was my life that just burned down. A grin spread across Sean's face. Prospero just stood there, dazed in his fire boots, wavering on the shore. Wasn't being rendered speechless a sign of falling in love? He wrote his number on the back of a Starbucks napkin. If she wasn't busy, there was a regional production of Hamlet on Friday. And then it hit her. As surely as fire finds the fuse, her soulmate had found her. Her indignation faded away. Why play hard to get with the one? After the fire trucks wailed away, Kathy loaded the few scraps and trinkets she'd salvaged in her trunk. Lawrence Weiner sidled up beside her. I hope you have insurance, he said. It's going to take weeks to repair all this damage. If you want, you can bivouac at my place. I have an emergency air mattress. Gosh. Kathy had no idea what bivouac meant, but there was no way she'd ever do it with Lawrence. Thanks for your concern, she said, bending over to pick up the cat carrier. I couldn't help noticing, Lawrence said. Now that I'm finally getting a good look, that's a very furry pussy you got there, isn't it? My Maine Coon is as hairy as a Greek sailor. Kathy straightened up, smoothing down her nightshirt. My special ed students have more tact, she snapped, even on ice cream Fridays. Lawrence stuck his finger in the hole on the side of the cat carrier and wiggled it. Mrs. Beasley hissed. Kathy got her into her car and slammed the door. She knew she'd left someone off her toxic ties list. She pulled into the gravel driveway of the house she'd grown up in and retrieved the key from under the mat, brushing aside some stray pine needles. A fake poinsettia was where the red bow was on the dining room table. She heard her father's labored breathing from the other room. He looked up when he saw her, turned off the Price is Right, and removed his oxygen tubing. He smiled, stretching his arms wide. His little girl was home. Thank you.
Beta blockers, anyone?